In 1988, I moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. I was a social worker with the hospice there. And Kenosha was a lakeside town, or is a lakeside town, and at the time was about 5 miles from the freeway. Gail worked at the outlet mall that was on the freeway, and I would drive her to work, and we would drive past cows as I took her to work. And then suddenly a church was built in the middle of the cow pasture. They had bought 500 acres, built on 10, and sold the rest to developers. And suddenly, they were the only church in a large neighborhood of McMansions. That are homes that were about a little less than a quarter acre on a quarter acre of property stacked up, thus making Kenosha no longer a town of its own, but the southernmost suburb of Milwaukee and the northernmost suburb of Chicago. I admired their strategy, but not their result. They had built a mega church in the midst of suburban sprawl. And I shouldn't really be too hard on them. They were just being the change they wanted to see in the world. They were in an exclusive church built in an exclusive neighborhood. But I wondered if their model could somehow be used for good. Would it be possible to build an inclusive church and in an inclusive community? That would be my idea of utopia. In the 19th century, there were several Unitarian and Universalist attempts at utopian communities. In the Dictionary of Unitarian Universalist Biography, Aaron McEmery writes about Brook Farm, which Josh put on the cover of your order of service. Brook Farm, a celebrated 19th century New England utopian community, was founded by the Unitarian minister George Ripley and other progressive transcendentalist Unitarians. To be, in Ripley's word, a new Jerusalem, a city of God anew. From its founding in 1841 until it went bankrupt in 1847, Brook Farm influenced many of the social reform movements of its day: abolitionism, working men's movement, and the women's rights movement. It represented both a test of the transcendentalist dreams and a challenge to transcendentalist individualism. It was, however, brought down by squabbles amongst investors, an outbreak of smallpox, and finally, a fire. Peter Hughes writes about another experiment. In nearby Milford, Massachusetts, Universalist, pacifist, socialist Aidan Ballou founded Hopedale in 1840. He also advocated abolition and temperance. The community was not a farm, it was more industrial. It had a loom that was invented by one of the investors, the Draper brothers. But when the Draper brothers wanted more money from their investment and realized that they could make a lot more money than the 4% allotted to them, they withdrew their investment in Hopedale and privatized their company. And Hopedale as a community died in 1856. The Hopedale community feebly survived in the form of a religious organization until 1867, when it was converted into the Hopedale Parish. It became a Unitarian church and was accepted into the Unitarian Association. And Ballou, who continued to be a Christian socialist, ministered to Unitarians even though he didn't think they were quite as Christian as they needed to be. In recent years, co-housing has given a new perspective on utopian communities. According to the Co-Housing Association of the United States, co-housing is an intentional community of private homes clustered around a shared space. Each attached or single-family home has traditional amenities, including a private kitchen, and shared spaces typically feature a common house, which may include a large kitchen and dining area, laundry, and recreational spaces. Shared outdoor space may include parking, walkways, open space, gardens, and neighbors also share resources like tools and lawnmowers. Households have independent incomes and private lives, but neighbors collaboratively plan and manage community activities and shared spaces. The legal structure is typically a homeowners association or condo association or housing cooperative. And they feature community activities, and the neighbors gather for parties, games, movies, and other events. Co-housing makes it easy to form clubs, organize child and elder care, and to carpool. As I've been pondering what I might do with my sabbatical, a couple of weeks I talked about working on a guide, a scripture guide that helps humanists and Christians realize that sometimes they're talking about the same thing in different languages. And next week I will talk about music in the church community. But this week I'm talking about this idea of co-housing and wondering if this might be a model for church communities in the 21st century. While I would be going out and visiting various UU and other communities and see how they work, people would need a task force of people here to say, what would that type of community look like in Lafayette? Because we talk about churches building communities in the sense that people gather here, they get to know each other, and they have a community. And you see young families coming together using our big screen TV, and it saves them money on babysitting and going out, and they can be comfortable and have fun in our community here. But what if we started building communities? I know we're kind of de facto doing that as more and more of our elders move into Westminster. I have a monthly luncheon there that includes 10 or 12 people. But as our economy changes and jobs and people need to retrain over and over and become even more mobile than we have been, sharing is not just a convenience, it's going to become a necessity in the upcoming century. As baby boomers retire and seek to downsize, young families will need and will be searching for their first home. What if we were to build small duplexes or triplexes around a community center And this is a place where kids growing up away from their grandparents could have elders who care for them, and elders whose children have moved away will still have a family-like support system. In Durham, North Carolina, the Eno River UU Fellowship is involved in the formation of Village Hearth Co-housing. 15 acres have been purchased, and they have a particular focus of ministering to aging LGBT persons. Their site reads, Elder Co-housing offers adults ages 55 and above the opportunity to live independently and to age in community within a close-knit and mutually supportive group of neighbors. We are now gathering with LGBT friends and allies to create a caring community in beautiful Durham, North Carolina. Our intention is to age in place in a community of good neighbors. We'll each have the cozy privacy of our own smaller, sustainable home, along with ample opportunities to be social while giving and receiving support within the community. In Massachusetts, UU cooperative communities have formed a Unitarian Universalist community cooperatives grounded in the values of Unitarian Universalism. It grows intentional housing communities as a spiritual practice, sustainability, and social change. It envisions owning multiple houses where communities of approximately 6 to 20 people can live intentionally and democratically, informed by Unitarian and Universalist values and tradition. The world as it is does not always allow us to a supportive environment to relate to our economies, our food systems, neighbors, and earths that most reflect our values. And looking at their website, it appears to be mostly young professionals who are living together in a community house and being more intentional about eating shared meals and actually having worship daily. Almost like a UU monastery, if one can imagine such a thing. These communities can take so many forms. In fact, it may even happen under a capitalistic model of planned communities. Between Baltimore and D.C. lies the city of Columbia. And it's a planned community amidst the suburban sprawl where Gail and I once lived. According to Wikipedia, Columbia is a planned community comprising 10 self-contained villages located in Howard County, the second wealthiest county in the United States. It began with the idea that a city could enhance its residents' quality of life. Creator and developer James Rouse saw the new community in terms of human values rather than merely economics and engineering. Opened in 1967, Columbia was intended not only to eliminate the inconveniences of the then current subdivision design, but also to eliminate racial, religious, and class segregation. In 2010, it had a population of 99,000, 55% white, 25% black, 11% Asian, and 7% Hispanic. The UU Church in Columbia meets at the Owen Brown Interfaith Center, which when I had visited it back in the 90s, had 3 congregations. They have continued to build this community center, so now this space is shared by Christ United Methodist Church, Grace Christian Ministries, the Sri Satya Saliba Center, a Hindu organization, the Muslim Family Center, and the Shalom Aleichem Congregation. every time they go to church, they are being part of an interfaith community. Can you imagine what this does for human relations? So what would this look like in Tippecanoe County? The simplest way is to buy property and form a separate 501c3 and start selling shares as a condo organization. If we totally finance it, we have total control. What's difficult about that is that if we totally finance it ourselves, we probably won't be able to build a very big thing. Those of you who went through the building search before I arrived here, I think you're cringing in your seats right now. But think about this amazing resources we have. We could increase our impact if we expanded our base. Purdue and Ivy Tech have departments that are exploring renewable energy. They might want to create model communities that show how this technology is possible. The city might be helpful in donating or selling undeveloped land. I have my particular eye on this big field south of Cat, which doesn't seem to have anything growing on it. But we also need to consider that we, as a congregation, are not as diverse as the general community. We may need to partner with African American, Asian, and Hispanic groups to build a truly diverse community. And last week, when I was researching Black Lives Matter website, I found this statement among their guiding principles. And I like it when I'm researching one sermon and I find something for another. It said, "We are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, and especially our children to the degree that the mothers, parents, and children are comfortable." So a sense of collectivism that you also find in the Israeli kibbutz. There's all these different models of how we build community. We are currently in a model where everybody has their own house and their own living, and we ask them to come to one building and give a portion of their income to support the activities here. That's one model of how we build community. It's been a harder and harder model to maintain. The 60s and 70s were probably the boom years of this, when you had fathers who were making a living wage such that mothers could stay home and you could use lots of volunteer power to build a church. That's how this building was built when it was a Methodist church. We now live in a reality of more two-income families, so there's not the spare volunteer time to get things done. When we have a budget meeting and we say, well, perhaps we could clean the church ourselves, people say, I don't have time to clean my own house. How am I going to volunteer to come here? And so, when I'm on sabbatical, I'm curious as to how these things actually work. I'm not a details person, and so that's going to be the struggle of me looking at all these details. But think about what this might look like. It might end up being 6 of us in this community who have a house somewhere that we share things and we just kind of, it's part of our community. Or this church might be responsible for a subdivision. Or we might do a student housing community partnership thing like Faith did. See, they're working on this model too, that they're not just a church separate where people can come to if they find them. They're using the model of building a cooperative community. And this is something that we may not want to take on this decade, but the decades to come, it may be forced upon us because the model that churches currently work in may not be sustainable. And so to look at what will happen to our movement, our congregation, and our communities as we go forward into the 21st century.